Welcome everybody to the fourth of the state's Digital Equity and BEAD Tribal Collaboration Outcome Area Working Group meetings. We're really excited to have you, or to be in participation with all of you today. I'm gonna, can we go to the next slide, please? Cole Prisbilla, could you please do the housekeeping?
Yeah, a few housekeeping items today. We will be posting the recording of this meeting, the slides and transcripts to the Broadband for All portal. For best viewing experience and visibility of the ASL interpreter, please go to the top right under the view and use the side-by-side speaker view. Closed captioning is available. Choose the closed captioning on the toolbar below. Finally, in chat, we invite everyone to use that tool. Please share your name, pronouns, organization, and title, and where you're joining us from. And finally, during some of our community discussion portions of the conversation, please use the reaction tools, which is the little smiley face down there, and there's a raise hand feature. Next slide. Today's agenda, we'll have a welcoming, an opening panel with some of our peers, a summary of key takeaways of our prior engagements, a community discussion, a conversation about the digital equity ecosystem mapping tool and public surveys, and next steps and close. Scott, will you now introduce our panelists and share an overview of today's panel?
Yeah, thank you, Cole. Could we go to the next slide, please? So we're really pleased to kick off today's meeting with a panel of folks that have really been instructive as we've put together the help to expand and understand the state's learnings and sensitivities on how we can partner with tribal nations on broadband and digital equity and general connectivity efforts. And we'd like to kick off the meeting here with Secretary Christina Snyder-Ashtari from the Governor's Office of Tribal Affairs. The slide here represents that following her, we've invited Chairman Shane Ratchford from the Cold Springs Rancheria of Mono Indians. Kenneth Holbrook, we've invited him to come. He may have had a conflict, and then we're really excited to have Vanessa Cressy, the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program Federal Program Officer for the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. And then we'll close with Matthew Rantanen, who is the Tribal Advisor to the Golden State Network, which is the Department of Technology's third-party administrator. So if you will, if we could drop the slides. Team, can we welcome Secretary Snyder-Ashtari, please?
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I know it's an early morning on a Friday, so happy to be with all of you. I think many of you have seen me multiple times in these spaces, so I'll try not to repeat myself, but do just want to thank you all for your ongoing engagement. I think that I've had the privilege of being here now over 5.5 years in this role. So have seen kind of the arcs of tribal engagement, have seen the arcs of where the state has become more thoughtful about engaging tribal communities, and really have been on the other side of when people had a limited understanding of what equity really meant, and are seeing how it's being really thought about, especially as applied to tribal communities who have unique circumstances, unique histories, and a unique place here in California. So I thought what I'd do today, I think what you'll hear as throughout the course of today's presentations is that we're at the end of a beginning stage, but that doesn't mean that we're at the end of everything. So we're going to need your engagement throughout this whole process, and really encourage you to continue to be in that space. But I did want to reflect a bit, my office about a year ago turned into the Office of Tribal Affairs within the governor's office. And we thought about what our mission was. And I just wanted to talk a bit about it today and kind of frame our meeting in that space. So our mission is to elevate issues of mutual importance to tribal nations in the governor's administration, as informed by meaningful government-to-government consultation and collaboration. In implementing the governor's policy priorities related to tribal nations, Native communities, and Indigenous peoples, our office continues to work with tribal nations to improve government-to-government relations, advance justice and equity for Native peoples, explore remedial actions to address past atrocities, expand tribal stewardship of ancestral lands and natural and cultural resources, promote visibility of the rich diversity and history of California Native cultures, and partner with tribal governments to bolster sound and sustainable economic development in California Indian country. So that's quite a lot of things, but I think at a baseline, what this process is doing is bringing all of those things to the forefront. And I think we're seeing in this process a real effort to deploy broadband in a way that will create equitable economic and community development opportunities for tribes throughout the state. We saw over the course of the last few years, and particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, where inequities in energy and broadband deployment have severely challenged the ability for some tribes to engage in cooperative discussions or consultations with the state, in addition to creating gaps for telehealth, engaging with loved ones, or getting critical resources and information to communities. As we've seen more jobs shift to telework, and we also see people shifting more toward what they value most at home and in community, we see both a tribal workforce that might live on tribal lands unable to do so with a lack of broader community supports and infrastructure, and an off-reservation workforce that's unable to take advantage of potential telework opportunities with tribes that might lack more robust IT capacities. Over the course of this planning process, tribes and California Native people have increasingly spoken up and shown up as the state and federal governments have asked what you need to be made whole in this space. In these spaces, and the state and federal governments are listening in a real effort to meet your communities where you're at. We have gone throughout the state. We've also offered some virtual opportunities, which I think can be confusing if you're trying to deploy broadband in an equitable way. But we really do want to get out to community as this process rolls out to make sure that you're all equitably engaged. California's recognized the critical need to view circumstances through that lens, that not all communities are in the same position, whether because of infrastructure gaps, historical inequities, or dispossession of cultural differences. And the policy initiatives that we continue to seek or to support seek to be responsive to those differences. So again, I want to thank you all for your engagement in this planning process. And as we move forward in the next stages of these processes, we hope that you'll continue to engage and to let us know where you're seeing gaps. But I am very encouraged by the fact that we've had so much engagement from the tribal community up to this point. And I think just from my perspective, I've seen where there was almost no discussion or siloing of tribal interests in the space of broadband and broadband deployment. And now we're in a space where we're thinking critically about how we can really get to your communities and create opportunities for you to support your own needs, priorities, and people. So again, really glad to be here. Glad to hear further discussion and looking forward to next steps. So I'll hand it back to you, Scott.
Thank you, Secretary. And just wanted to say that you've been such a, you and the office have been such strong allies on broadband and, tribal affairs, both as members of the Broadband Council, but dating back to a couple of years ago when we created the, under your leadership, the California Tribal Broadband Connectivity Partnership Summit. And, your office continues to, be a central player and helping, as you said, kind of bring along the other state agencies and, fostering that meaningful engagement with our tribal nation partners. And I think what you underscored is this is such an important moment in time coming out of COVID where, we have this multi-level, federal, state, local leadership policy and funding to promote connectivity that, to bring folks together in this space the state folks and the NTIA folks is really important with our tribal nation leaders and partners. So just very much extend our gratitude and thanks to you. So next up, I'm trying to look, Chairman Ratchford, team, can you help me? Chairman Ratchford, have you been able to join? Okay. I am gonna call on audible here. I know folks have been having a little bit of difficulty joining in today. I'm gonna maybe mix the order a little bit here, and Vanessa Cressy from the National Telecommunications and Information Administration would like to invite you to, provide, some comments about the federal state partnership and any new developments that are going on at the NTIA.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. I'm calling in and joining from outside of Sacramento, California. Thanks for giving me a few minutes on the agenda. We are excited to announce yesterday the availability of nearly $1 billion in funding to expand internet access and adoption on tribal lands. This additional funding was made possible by the bipartisan infrastructure law. This is the second round of tribal broadband connectivity program funding. And we will make approximately up to $980 million available for Native American, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian communities for the deployment of infrastructure on tribal lands, affordability programs, telehealth, and distant learning initiatives. We have already awarded about $1.7 billion in funding to 191 tribal entities since the program started back in 2021. We will be expecting to make funding in the ranges of 1 million to 50 million for internet infrastructure deployment projects, and between 100,000 and 2.5 million for adoption and use projects. More information about this, and including the notice of funding opportunity, can be found on grants.gov. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, and that's really important. I know, in all of our engagements over the last couple of years that we've done in partnership with NTIA, that many of the California tribal nations are looking to the tribal broadband connectivity program, and many have been awards have been made to the state of California. So we look forward to working with the NTIA and the Public Utilities Commission and other folks to help support applications to that process. And we'll very happy to share as much information as we can about the NOFO and the process. So really appreciative of the good work and partnership that we have with the NTIA and how it's making a meaningful difference here in California for the state and for tribal nations, because you're managing so many different programs.
You're welcome, and we appreciate the collaborative relationship as well. I will put in the link where you can find more information about the funding as well. I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you so much. Now, Cole, can you help me with the order of the next speaker? I think I'd like to call on Matt Rantanen, who is the, many of you know, he interacts in a lot of different capacities in relationship to tribal connectivity. He's been a longtime advisor to the California Broadband Council, and now is the tribal advisor to the state's third-party administrator. I'd like to bring you and Matt and kind of wonder if you can kind of speak to us about the importance of the ongoing collaboration and the various structures that we've created over the last couple of years, and what that means, because I think you've always had like a really interesting perspective and view on this.
Sure. Thank you, Scott. And thanks, everyone. And then I would just like to follow up with Vanessa's comments and ask if she could put in the chat when the proposed final announcements for first round will be, because I know there are some tribes in overlap, and that question's been posed to me by several tribes, whether or not they will find out in the next couple of weeks so that they can know if they need to apply for round 2. So if you could put that in the chat, that'd be wonderful for folks. Yeah, so in my capacity currently as Vice President of Tribal Broadband at Golden State Net, and working with CDT directly on the middle mile build, but then also wearing my Southern California Tribal Chairman's hat occasionally as the Director of Technology there for 22 years, and interacting with CPUC and all of the other granting organizations, both state and federal. This is one of those times in history where it's all happening now. So, the state has done a wonderful job of doing outreach, and then giving the opportunity for tribal consultation one-on-one, as is expected by the tribes. And when tribes want that level of interaction, they can certainly have it. It's a period in time when some of the tribes are very advanced in their telecommunications development, and some tribes are just barely getting started. So I think the biggest piece of this is that you're not doing this alone. Everybody is attempting to solve these problems and include their communities. And then the digital equity piece comes in as you start to build and after you start to deploy, and teaching the community and engaging the community on how broadband can enhance your life, not be a hindrance to your life. And a lot of tribal communities missed this opportunity during the Stimulus Act in Obama's administration, where the money didn't flow to tribes for this opportunity. A few tribes got a hold of it. The Tribal Chairmen's Association in Southern California got a hold of it and ran a 2-year process where they were doing digital equity and engagement with community members to help better understand how to use internet. But I think this time around, there is enough direct focus on supporting the tribal communities in their efforts to do outreach and include their individual tribal members, that it's extremely important to make sure that your efforts in building digital infrastructure and physical infrastructure also include the components that bring in your community and bring up the level of education around technology for your community. 1, so that they have the use of the resource. 2, so they don't get taken advantage of some of the pitfalls that exist on the internet. And then, learn to build that into their future life path, if you will, to make things easier. Remote locations are no stranger to reservation. Reservation, is almost synonymous with that. So some of those resources that you have to drive all the way to town for are at your fingertips with internet. So, really important for enhancing people's lives and making things easier for folks on the reservation. There's a wonderful host of programs through the Public Utilities Commission, and if Ken were here, he would be highlighting that, excuse me. And I think that with the number of grants for the technical assistance and the the follow-up to building out last mile programs that are at the CPUC, tribal leaders and tribal technology people need to be engaged at all fronts. So please don't hesitate to do any outreach to the CPUC, Golden State Net, CDT for any of these opportunities, and we will help get you aligned with those pieces of the puzzle that you may need to put together. So thank you.
Thanks, Matt. And you brought up so many, I think, critical points. Is that number one, there's a lot of folks and entities from the federal government, the state government, and then other entities within the state broadband ecosystem, like Indian Health Services, et cetera, that are really committed to partnering with tribes to support, connectivity across the board. So from the access and the infrastructure piece to the affordability and promotion of the affordability connectivity program where it's available to participating providers on tribal lands. And something that was really important is, helping tribes communicate that to folks who might live off reservation or are members of tribes that don't currently have land. And then the digital literacy piece. And so I know that's critically important. And I think, one thing that you brought up is something we've heard throughout the process is that there's so many different funding programs. Like, that's the good news. The challenge is that, potentially for the tribes that need the funding from those programs the most, that there's like limited capacity. And I think it was really, and even subject matter expertise. And you've talked throughout this process in many different formats about the boot camps that are going on. And I'm wondering, because, at times there's, different folks are joining at different points. If you can talk a little bit about how the boot camps have helped kind of expand, understanding and subject matter expertise.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, so the Tribal Broadband Boot Camp is something that came about as COVID was still problematic on reservations in 2021. I think July was the first one. We had a lot of requests from tribes for information about broadband and how to manage broadband and how to apply for some of the NTIA funding or how to manage their NTIA funding application. And some of the bigger money pots that were, being suggested at the federal government, and then trickle down through the state as well. And we didn't have a way to go on reservation because they were all blocked, right? So nobody was allowed to travel onto reservation for fear of transmitting COVID. So we ended up having an event at my house in Southern California, which I have some land. So we were able to be socially responsible, spread out outdoors, and have a sort of a groundbreaking first event with 29 folks. I think there were 7 tribes represented, and to date we have done 8 of those about every couple of months, 3 months, and they have included 246 tribal members from 46 different reservations building broadband. And the overall theme, it's amazing, because going to National Congress of American Indians and NAFOA and Reservation Economic Summit, I feel like all tribes know each other, but it's really not the case when you get down in the weeds of building broadband, because some of those department heads or some of those people that are being charged with building broadband don't get that national access to other tribes. And we're really feeling like they were doing this by themselves and they didn't know anything else that was going on. So when they got together in this room, they started sharing experiences and opportunities and solutions and stories. It was amazing. It created this human network of people that are all doing the same thing at different stages in development, but could share experiences with each other. And effectively, I can step out of the middle. So these people all have access to each other on a platform that's promoted through the boot camps. It's like an online chat facility, and they are able to communicate with each other throughout the year about different issues. Hey, we're short of, of conduit for fiber, and does anybody have some? Or hey, we're thinking about this vendor, is it a good solution? Hey, this is a solution we had for mountainous regions with trees, but how do we deal with this type of environment or this type of geography? And it's really changed that group's perspective on what their opportunities and resources are. So really an eye-opening experience. It covers business models, how to manage outside vendors. It covers some of the legal aspects of things. It covers FCC stuff. It covers grant opportunities and funding opportunities, both regional, state and federal, and then some of the foundations that are a national level. And then it has a, you know, a hands-on fiber day. You get to splice fiber and realize, you know, demystify fiber in front of yourself, you know, just, it's amazing. And then you get a chance to, you know, build a wireless network link as well and understand the properties of that. So it really puts people into a space where they have their head around what they're dealing with. And then, you know, there's a bunch of different directions to go from there, but it gives them a platform to stand on and learn from everybody else that's been building mistakes and experiences, so that they're not starting from ground zero. They're starting from, you know, a level where they're like, okay, I get this, and now I just need to, you know, get some certified folks and get access to maybe an engineer and start building desktop plans and things like that. But they know their pathway at that point. And then there's other resources supplied to them through the boot camp afterwards. So it is an interesting opportunity. The next one is next week in Mohawk, Akwesasne, New York. And then we'll be back in California near the end of the year, probably November, maybe December. Maybe one of the Pomo bands, because we have a lot of interest from one of the California bands, the Pomo Indians, and then potentially back in Southern California. So thanks.
Great, thanks, Matt. And again, the boot camps present such a great opportunity to provide support and foundational knowledge across the board of broadband. And you know, some of the many learnings that have been shared with us are about at the high level with all of this broadband funding, that a focus on sovereignty and ownership and a desire to be perceived as owners, not necessarily as customers. And so a critical component is like building capacity and helping, to support, those tribes with those, goals that could be achieved through leveraging this funding. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. And looking at the chat, I thank you, Vanessa, for answering Steph's question. And I'm Kathy Buchanan. I'm wondering if we can, when we get to the community discussion, if you could reiterate that, the point you made in the chat. But now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker and panelist. And over the last year, the state's tried to the Department of Technology and the Public Utilities Commission and the Secretary's Office and the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development have tried to create a process for as many folks to engage when they can. So we've had these virtual convenings, and then we've had some in-person group consultations. And we met Chairman Shane Ratchford from the Cold Springs Rancheria of Mono Indians. And Chairman Ratchford, I think you have joined now. Would love to invite you to come and share from your perspective, the barriers, the constraints, the challenges, and how your tribe is approaching broadband and connectivity in general.
I'm Shane Ratchford. I'm from Cold Springs Rancheria, the tribal chairman. How's everybody doing today?
Great.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, right now we just hired a grant writer to help me with these kind of things where we need the funding and help and get to see how this is done. And where we're at in Cold Springs, we just had another mishap where something happened to our internet at the tribal office and it went down, and the telephone company, Ponderosa, said they'd be right out to work on it. Well, it's been already 3 weeks and they still haven't came out. They keep putting us off. And that's one of the reasons why I feel we really need broadband in our remote area on our reservation. And it's happening to us right now. And I really want to go to the boot camps, and I want to get involved with this program. And I'm just kind of upset about our Ponderosa telephone company right now. It's awful. And if we had an emergency here, we're trying to conduct business at our office and we can't because of these problems. And I know we have a cell phone tower funding, but I gotta look into that, but I really want to get the broadband going, what I want to have. After hearing the chairman of Tule River speak about his cell phone tower, I don't think it's gonna be a good idea for us to have one. I'd rather do broadband.
Yeah, and thank you, Chairman. I know that was really, compelling when we met down in Porterville. Because throughout this process, we've heard about the need, not just for service, like for infrastructure and service, but to have reliable and resilient infrastructure, given the critical nature to support essential services and communications and disasters. And I think that you really eloquently echoed a lot of what we heard back from some of the other tribes. It was mentioned that of the sheer number of tribal nations in California, that folks are just in various states, and that along in the process and capacity. And so we were really honored to meet with you and look forward to continuing to partner with you and your tribe to the extent that we can to leverage these resources.
I remember maybe about 13 years ago, they brought fiber optic line through Burro Valley, and they ran it, they bored it underground, big old orange plastic pipe with a bunch of cables. And I think it came within like 8 miles of our reservation. But I don't know of anybody up there that's even using it right now, where I've seen it put in. But I know it's close. I hope it's close. I hope that's what I saw. It might make it a lot easier for us to get it to our reservation.
Got it. And I know we were talking a little bit about it. I know, from an impact standpoint, definitely the finding a way to leverage this funding to create, greater connectivity solutions for the tribe is just gonna, or in partnership with the tribe, is gonna have a substantial difference in, the life experience. So, is there anything else, Chairman, that you wanted to share about how you guys are looking forward ahead in any specific ways that from your unique perspective, the state or the federal government can continue in this period of enormous funding to support tribes like yours?
Well, that's why pretty much we hired a grant writer. We haven't had one in a while to look for the funding that you made available for us down at when we did a collaboration with Tule River in Porterville. And right now I'm just trying to look into finding some honest bettors, that we know would be good to have to help with this project and help us and how we're gonna get the cable, I guess. And we're just trying to find out what's available.
Well, and thank you, Chairman Radford. Both the Public Utilities Commission and the Department of Technology and other state agencies are, really, stand ready to help and support where we can. Matt, I see your hand raised. Did you want to respond to something the chairman said?
Yeah, I just wanted to offer up that though the state and the CPUC can't recommend those to work with, they do have a long-standing understanding of who is working with who, and can probably provide some information of who's working with other tribes that you could do outreach to those tribes and find out how that experience is and vet those vendors on you know, through the other tribes. So that is an option. I know CPUC has done that in the past, and a lot of us know who's working with who. So happy to share that information, and then you can do outreach to the tribe to find out how that's going.
Yeah, and thanks, Matt, for underscoring that point, because it was a very specific comment that was given at the Porterville event, and it was also something that we've heard throughout our engagement over the last 2 years, that there is some vulnerability out there for tribal nations when interacting with vendors who would support you know, federal or state funding programs, and that above and beyond, say, the Better Business Bureau, you know, verification list, that as we build out the state's digital equity plan or the BEAD action plan, that creating some kind of a structure and framework, and we don't necessarily know what that looks like, that could have potentially a qualified vendor list, or a, you know, a reputable vendor list, that would be something that could really, you know, support the ecosystem of California tribal nations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Radford. Like, it's always a pleasure, and we appreciate you coming in and joining in and sharing your unique perspective. So I do believe that that is the conclusion of our panel. I know Mr. Holbrook from the PUC, you know, wanted to come and speak. One thing that I would do under the auspices of sort of mutual aid is, I know that the Public Utilities Commission was very grateful for all of the feedback and engagement that they received throughout the process and in drafting their initial BEAD 5-year action plan, which is currently out for public comment. So as follow-up to this meeting, we'll be sending along some information, and would definitely want to make sure that folks here on this call could have the ability to review what they put down and provide public comments. I also wanted to share, I don't think they'll mind, their gratitude that this process and the formal engagements that have occurred over the last month is yielded, I think, 20 to 25 requests for formal consultations on broadband related issues for them. And I know they're very excited to meet and establish you know, those one-to-one consultations that Secretary Snyder-Ashtari mentioned were so critical. I think with that, the one thing that I would say from the Department of Technology's perspective on, you know, broadband for all, and on the middle mile side, and on the digital equity plan development, we're just incredibly honored by the extensive engagement and the, you know, I think the generosity of knowledge and experience that California tribes have shared with us to help us understand how we could both be sensitive to and supportive of tribes as we work towards, you know, leveraging the resources we have to work on the programs that we're doing. And we're very committed as well to engaging in as many different ways as possible and meeting folks where they are. And one of my roles within the California Department of Technology is as the department's travel advisor. So, you know, my information and my staff information is included in the slides that we'll send out, and we would extend that, you know, invitation for a formal consultation on, you know, either the middle mile or, you know, the digital equity plan. And we're going to, I think, segue to the next portion of our meeting. And team, can we bring the slides back up?
Yes, 1 second.
Thank you. And again, wanted to just thank our panelists for help teeing up this conversation of our 4th Tribal Collaboration Digital Equity Working Group. So can we go to the next slide, please? You know, part of this process has been for us to gain a deeper understanding of the barriers to digital equity. And as I had mentioned, this is our 4th Tribal Collaboration Working Group. And we've also done the 17 regional workshop at which there was representatives from tribal nations. And then, you know, I think 25 to 30 individual interviews with tribal entities and then the in-person consultations. I'd like to invite Zach Ferguson, who is a graduate student at the UC Berkeley Goldman School of Public Policy, who helped do a lot of our research and put together a paper on this. Zach, would you like to walk through maybe the barriers that across the board, just give us a high level, you know, this is not an exhaustive list, but this is, you know, in broad terms, what we've heard from folks thus far.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Scott. Like Scott mentioned, this is, you know, what some of the beginnings of the learnings that we've had from this engagement process through the different public meetings we've hosted, the one-on-one consults and more direct engagements, and then just interviews that I've done with various folks. And again, not an exhaustive list, but kind of a brief overview of what's really stood out to us, and then understanding also that all of these, you know, while they represent barriers to digital equity, they all lead to the then disparate outcomes in education, health, workforce, economic development, and other outcomes. And so to start, kind of just generally, you know, the existing infrastructure and supporting infrastructure and lack of service availability that a community might face, particularly a tribal community or reservation, is really significant in where you may be starting from in terms of being able to deploy broadband infrastructure and then later on, you know, achieving actual digital equity, whether or not you have power and roads to begin with. We also understand tribes and tribal communities have a heightened vulnerability to disasters, and we heard a little bit about that mentioned, you know, from our panelists. Also, the lack of affordability of services and devices is a huge factor. You know, you can have broadband deployed, you can have the infrastructure, but if you can't afford the devices or use the service, you know, you're still not able to get to the level of digital equity and access that we need. Another thing that's come up for us that we've seen is that tribal benefits don't extend to off-reservation members. And so kind of understanding that, particularly when we're thinking about how the state's going to design programs and how we can be helping facilitate the use of both state and federal programs, is really significant in deploying resources. Thinking about, you know, and Matt mentioned this earlier, just that digital literacy and kind of the use and adoption piece of achieving digital equity, and how sometimes if someone hasn't used the internet or used devices much before, you know, there can be some fear there. And so the importance of empathetic teaching and training and kind of overcoming that fear and really achieving digital literacy in order to achieve digital equities is key. As a state, we understand that trust and persistent poverty are also huge barriers, not just to digital equity, but to a variety of outcomes that tribes and tribal communities may be trying to achieve. And particularly as the state, you know, understanding that through these engagements and through the relationship building that the state has to do, trust is really one of the big end goals there in building trust between the state and tribes and tribal communities. And then finally, staffing, and again, this was talked about a little bit earlier, but staffing and broadband subject matter expertise can be varied and limited, you know, depending on the tribe, depending on the community. Understanding, you know, the myriad of things and priorities that tribes are facing, and deciding what to prioritize, where broadband and digital equity may fall on that list is going to vary. And then broadband expertise, like Matt mentioned, you know, fiber and the different jargon and different, you know, things you have to understand in order to deploy broadband infrastructure is really significant. And so ways to boost that capacity, both in terms of staffing and in terms of subject matter expertise and knowledge, is really key to helping create the administrative structures that are needed to get digital equity throughout our communities. And I'll turn it back over to Scott now to talk about some of the things we're thinking about in terms of strategies for moving forward.
Thank you, Zach. Appreciate you going through and just want to continue to understand that we know that both our relationship with tribal nations and communities, and that our understanding of needs and how we can support is like there's not going to be a central point in time where we just have all the answers. So this is what we're hoping to do is demonstrate that what we have heard and learned, and to share it back to make sure that we got it right, which is going to be the one of the follow-ups in our community discussion. But part of the process has been to on broadband for all in general, but on the digital equity planning and the BEAD planning has been to fulfill the mission that was given to us by the NTIA, which was, understand the unique barriers for the different populations, and then develop strategies with input and feedback from those folks. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So what this slide represents is, again, a high level summary and distillation of pairing of the an enormous amount of feedback that we had received from our meetings and our consultations. And I want to make sure to give voice to these because we're going to want to ask you to make sure, to check us to make sure we got them right. But the first recommended strategy is to just expedite infrastructure deployment, affordability, and adoption efforts across the board. And that relates to both getting the funding programs out, building the state's open access middle mile network, and being mindful of future funding plans that they need to get out quickly because there's an urgency to the need. The second was to really pair broadband deployment with other infrastructure efforts like roads and power and build in resilience. And so we heard that a lot across the state and at the in-person consultations and through these meetings that, in some places broadband funding can't be leveraged unless there are roads or power. And so finding a way to better synchronize both the funding opportunities and the build out efforts so that they can be more streamlined and get out to where the need is. The third recommended strategy was something that we heard loud and clear, multiple fronts, but definitely at our in-person is that it's critically important that the state and entities doing infrastructure projects utilize tribal cultural monitors to advise on those projects from a cultural sensitivity standpoint, but also from a job development standpoint as well. The fourth was that partnerships just in general are vital to achieving digital equity and should be incentivized. So whether it's partnerships between the state and or the federal government and the tribal nations, or partnerships between tribal nations and private sector, philanthropic or community-based organizations or other service-based organizations, that is a really effective strategy. The fifth one, definitely that partnerships must include comprehensive engagement and meeting folks where they are in a way that's sensitive to the constraints. So getting out there and meeting people in the physical community and not just doing these virtual convenings. The sixth point is really something that we want to stress that we heard, is that in all of these efforts to be sensitive and mindful to both tribal sovereignty and tribal digital sovereignty, and that those kind of twin focuses should be promoted in all state programs. The next one is about initiatives should couple broadband access with business development and other outcomes related to health and education. We've heard numerous examples of tribes, in various parts of the state that, broadband is a key to some of the other top priorities like healthcare, supporting, health centers that are, on reservation or closer to the populations, supporting mental health, education, et cetera. And also to support the economic activity that, tribes are engaging in, whether it's a variety of businesses or other things. So that was, a big takeaway. I think the eighth one, that data can play an important role in identifying and understanding how residents are currently accessing services. We understand, we've kind of heard both sides of that that's, that data is both, a good thing to more efficiently target funding and deploy services, but that it has to be done sensitively in a right way, given the, historic inequities and injustices, and that there's a, an apprehension for folks on tribal lands to want to put themselves on a map somewhere that might expose them to future harm. So definitely heard that and are thinking through how we can incorporate that into our future plans. And I think, again, the last but not least of what we learned, because this is really a distillation of, a lot of substantial feedback, is that ongoing assistance and support are needed to take advantage of the multiple federal and state programs. And so, we've learned that and experienced that, this is a complex and multidimensional issue of, connectivity and closing the digital divide that includes access and infrastructure and network deployment, and it includes affordability programs to make even the infrastructure and service that's deployed affordable for folks, including being able to obtain devices, and then the digital literacy piece and tapping into programs to fund digital navigators. We've heard a lot of folks like the Hoopa tribe that are deploying digital navigators to help people get connected, that those things are often funded by these programs, and the programs are so multiple that it's hard to navigate and find out, what steps you need to go through. So we've heard about the tremendous value about the existing technical assistance programs that are going on at the PUC through the California Advanced Service Fund, and then the local agency technical assistance program that was established as part of the the Senate Bill 156 federal funding account. And as good as those are, there's still this potential foundational gap in capacity to get to where you can, folks can apply for those programs and then tap in to that. So things like boot camps, we've heard, find a way to fund and structure more boot camps. And some folks have even referenced creating or putting together a digital navigator program for tribal entities that can kind of help do that, be a trusted entity that can help, provide a needs assessment and help connect the dots, potentially provide grant writing assistance. So, some really, excellent strategies came back from our engagement. And, you know, this forms the basis of a lot of what will find its way into both the digital equity and BEAD plans. And so, Cole, I think we can go to the next slide, or our production team. Thank you, Fiona. So I think that the other thing that we're trying to learn on, and this is a self-deprecating joke, is to talk less and to listen more. And so we give you our commitment that as we continue to extend this engagement, that we'll be better about you know, information dump and more about listening and learning. But we wanted to make sure we went through this information to make sure folks knew we heard, and that we are doing our best to understand how we can shape our plans moving forward. So we'd like to turn over to the discussion to the community. If we could go to the next slide. And so what we'd like to use this time to really to help us understand is we tried to summarize the barriers that we've learned. So, you know, for the folks in this meeting, are there any additional barriers to broadband connectivity or digital equity experienced by tribes and tribal supporting entities that we did not cover? The next question would be, what strategies are missing from what we shared earlier? Because we want to make sure we leave room for those. And then the third question is really, for these strategies to be successful, what types of partnerships or assistance from the state and other organization is sought or needed? And so I'll defer to the team on how we want to do this. It might be instructive if we drop the prompts into the chat and then take down the slides so that folks can unmute their video and audio and jump in. So please feel free for folks to raise their hands. Kathy.
Good morning. I'm with the Tribal Marine Collaborative up here in Crescent City. And a lot of the tribes that we work with have no funding to travel to these boot camps and so on and so forth. They are absolutely strapped for cash. So, and my question in the chat was, are these programs available to non-recognized groups here in the state of California? Because I know a lot of the federal programs, we can't apply for them. And the state of California is kind of so-so on granting funds to unrecognized groups. So how are the non-recognized tribes going to be able to access these programs?
Kathy, thank you very much for asking the question. And we do continue to understand our the difference between, you know, the federally recognized tribes, the non-federally recognized tribes, and even some of the cross-border tribes that you know, they're out there. Travel is a big issue, and also eligibility for the programs. We understand that. I need to go back because I'm still learning about how those programs apply, but I saw, Matt, you had a hand up wondering if you had something that you wanted to share in response to this.
Yeah, so the applying to the state and the federal programs is complicated if you're not a federally recognized tribe for those specifics. As far as the boot camps are concerned, there are about 10 full scholarships to travel with each boot camp that are funded by the funders that support the boot camps. So if you get your name and interest and spell that out in the comments, there's potential you can attend those boot camps, other fundraising efforts.
Thanks, Matt. And Kathy, I think the one thing I would want to say is that we're happy to talk more and learn more about those specific challenges. And I would extend the offer to, you know, meet with, you know, myself and our staff, and particularly Zach, to learn more about that. So we'll make sure that our contact information is in the follow-up email. I'm wondering, I believe that you asked an earlier question to in the chat. Did you want to give voice to that here, or do you?
Sure. My other question was, because infrastructure is so extremely expensive and hiring private contractors is pretty much out of the question for a lot of the isolated tribes, because again, there is very little money. So does the state or the federal government have crew? I know they have crews to maintain infrastructure. Will the crews, can the tribes appeal to the state to use those crews so that we don't have to pay the consulting fees or the private costs? Because I know I used to work for a private engineering firm, and I know their cost multiplier was at least 3 for anybody that was hired by a client. And there's no money to pay for that. Even municipalities and other organizations have a hard time paying for that high cost.
Has crews that are specifically building that can be allocated, but again, would love to have a follow-up meeting with you to better understand and kind of talk through both questions you posed today, and see how that can further inform you know, next steps.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. So Mandy, Macias, I see a question in the chat here. I'm happy to read it out loud. Or if you want, would invite you to unmute yourself and give voice to your question.
Yeah, I can unmute myself. Manaho. My name is Mandy Macias. I'm a member of the Dunlap Band of Mono Indians here in Eastern Fresno County. And my question was specific to, I guess, the allotment lands and some of the liberties given to the tribes with allotment lands and federal trust lands with regards to funding that, you know, even though they're non-federally recognized, which our community is, a portion of our tribe resides on federal trust land. And so I was wondering if there were some parallels for the non-recognized tribes that are securing, or that may want to secure financial support and funding to their residents, which would end, of course, on their federal trust land, if there is something parallel to what the reservation tribes might be able to do.
Well, thank you for asking the question. And I would say that as it, you know, relates to, you know, trust lands and land allotment, that exceeds my my knowledge base. We're happy to take this down and follow up with you sometime afterward, and you know, try to come up with you know, some kind of an answer or direction there.
Oh, no, that's great. I mean, it's just, I'm jumping in. I'm also an archaeologist for the state, so we're looking at the projects on a broadband level completely differently. But you know, the trust land, the reservation, and then the recognized and the unrecognized tribes, they're four very unique facets that we work with. So as a tribal representative, you know, I'm always trying to figure out where we fit into the process and at the same time implement process. So I figured I might as well ask the question since you guys are online.
Oh, absolutely. And we thank you very much. We're appreciative of for bringing that into the space and raising it for awareness and understanding. So wondering, are there want to leave it open for more questions, or are there any additional questions from folks either that would like to raise their hands and unmute and give voice to remember any barriers that we might have missed, any strategies that we might have not heard correctly, or any specific kinds and types of partnerships that folks have seen have worked and that would want to make sure that we are considering.
Just don't forget about the last mile. That's all I ask.
Thank you, Chairman. No, the last mile is absolutely critical. Ms. Buchanan.
Can if a non-recognized tribe were to partner with a recognized tribe, can the non-recognized tribe use the funding also?
Interesting. I'm wondering, I think we might have to take that one back. Venezia, do you have an answer to that from the NTI perspective, or?
So I think for TBCP specifically, it depends on what you're applying for. So if you all, or the NOFO already defines eligible entities. So the eligible entities that can serve, who could apply, but also serve as the lead. If it's consortium, includes those that I listed in the chat. But even if you have a consortium, which is looking at a regional approach, each of them still must be an eligible entity. So for example, you have a tribal organization that may serve as the lead on behalf of several tribal governments. The tribal governments they all have to be an eligible entity, which they are since they're a federally recognized tribal government. So there is some language on page 16 of the NOFO that talks about consortium applications.
Thanks, Vanessa, and thank you, Kathy, for another great question. I see Brendan Betancourt. You asked a really interesting question, and I was wondering if you're in a place where you can unmute and ask the question and maybe just forward the conversation. I think part of what this process is about is not just what how the state can work with tribal nations or the federal government, but those other entities that are critical support partners to tribes. And I know we've heard from a lot of folks in this process that if we ask the question, what current broadband or digital equity work are you doing? If they're not working, it can sort of leave an unanswerable question, but really like the proactive outreach, Brandon, from you this week, that it was kind of like this aha moment that like I've been participating in this and I finally can see where we can participate in this process. So Brandon, I'd love to invite you to kind of speak to that.
I'm able to unmute, but I'm having an issue with my camera. So sorry about that.
You got it. Oh, now we can see you. And
Oh, there we go. Great.
yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I guess, I mean, I think a lot of the conversations around this get into the infrastructure and sort of that aspect of it, which obviously is, you know, critically important. So yeah, it's taken me a while to figure out where an organization like Chop a Day, you know, primary care provider can fit in. But, you know, we talk to lots of people every day about, you know, if they have an email address, if they have devices, if they have these things so that we can help connect them to our digital health services. And when they don't, there's not a whole lot of options and things for us to do about that. Or if they don't know how to use the technology, or if they don't have the right device. And so I guess I see us as fitting in as identifying those needs and then trying to connect people to services, providers, whatever, that can kind of, you know, help them get what they need so that they can take advantage of what we offer, but then also all the other things that become available when you have access to the internet and you know how to use it.
Yeah, and thank you, Brandon. That's I think really that's exactly how the NTI was shaping and framing both how states develop the digital equity plan and they utilize digital equity capacity dollars, is looking across the board, like how do we identify barriers for key populations, how do we develop strategies to overcome those, and how do we fund really at the regional and local level through trusted partners like you know, community-based organizations, services organizations, even promotoras, if you will, and really from a digital navigation standpoint, using like or empowering health navigators or community navigators to be digital navigators. So really just thankful for the you know, the email that you sent us in advance of this, kind of like seeing where, you know, what role you folks could play and really given voice for I think a lot of folks that have been wrestling with this idea of how do we embed digital equity and, you know, broadband adoption, digital literacy training into our existing program.
Yeah, and kind of to further that, I think community health representatives are an excellent workforce that can be developed into digital navigators. But you know, they need training, they need other supports and things like that. And that's where, at least from my perspective, I don't know what our best solution is. Do we write grants ourselves to try to get you know, more funding for positions and training, or are there collaborations we can have with other grantees that already have systems in place and maybe even already have some of the expertise, and then just could sort of train our staff. But yeah, those are just some of my first thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, thank you. And you're going to see a lot of that in our draft digital equity plan, the, you know, utilizing capacity grants to do just that, employing both the train the trainer model, you know, local community representatives to be digital navigators, et cetera. So just thanks a lot. I know we've got some more items on the agenda. It looks like we do have a question. Mr. Corella, do you want to come off mute and ask the question here? Yep.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Adams. Good afternoon to all. Excellent presentation today, team. Question for Mr. Rantanen in his role with Golden State Network. I know the Golden State Network is handling the construction of California's middle mile, and we are actively working with and in support of the Y-Pipe Band of Kumeyaay Indians in San Diego County. We're aggressively pursuing funding for construction, but we're very interested in the timing, Matt, of when Golden State Network will be publishing final routes for middle mile network along Caltrans rights of way, so that we can propose connecting to those. We think there's some advantages, obviously, in the San Diego region. As you're well aware, EBKI is a member of SCTCA, so maybe you could give us some guidance on timelines, on when those routes will be finalized, because that fits right into our TBCP application planning. Thank you to NTIA for publishing the NOFO yesterday.
Sure. The timeline, I'll do that first. So the timeline, everything is on a clock because it's CARES Act funding flowing through the state. So
Right.
everything has to be allocated and assigned, essentially spent or contracted by the end of 2024. And it all has to be built by the end of 2026.
Understood.
Those route confirmations, the CDT is going through a finalization of routes right now, getting final things in place. There are cost shifts based on some, outside factors that we're working in to try to make sure that we can build as much as we possibly can. I would say that the route that is closest to the Waypipe Band of Kumeyaay Indians is probably the Interstate 8 route. And Sunrise Highway is not, as far as I understand, is not in consideration to be added back in at phase 1 of this map opportunity. So the construction evaluation map can be found through the California Broadband for All. And you can see that map on the internet now. That is the evaluation map. Doesn't mean it's finalized, but the Interstate 8 route is a very, a very solid route that is very important for a number of communities, high population densities throughout Southern California. So I would assume that route does not go away.
That's probably a very good assumption for us. We'd love to, connect along I-8. I'll have to check the specific map, because if we can reasonably confidently assure that, then that affects our TBCP application. So thank you, Matt.
You can connect anywhere, right? So they'll do what's called a ring cut. If you have a interconnection point where you can get to a certain area, they will build in your connectivity there and provide a shadow vault for you to get access to that route at that location. So it's not like you have to meet one of the huts 50 miles away. You will be able to access that, mid-span.
Right. I think GSN has periodic points, and we can connect at any of those. So,
any of those, and then there can be customized points, but it would be nice to know those ahead of time.
You read my mind. Thank you, Matt.
No worries.
Thank you, Scott, for letting me ask.
Well, thank you, Mr. Krill. And I just wanted to add that just last week, the Department of Technology's Middle Mile Broadband Initiative team provided an update on both the optimization process and the kind of the phase 1 mileage map of the total miles that was going to be that was being optimized. As that map gets updated to the Middle Mile Broadband Initiative website, it's also going to be concurrently added to the PUC's federal funding account website. We will send all of that information out to folks on this call, who are part of the broader network of folks.
Very good. And we are tracking the federal funding account and last mile initiatives as well, as possible funding source. So thank you, Scott.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I want to thank everyone for their very thoughtful questions, and we're taking notes and we'll follow up. Cole, could you please advance us to the next portions of the meeting? Because I know we're running a little bit low on time.
Yeah, I'd love to invite Rich Voss from Broadband Equity Partnerships to come talk about the survey and survey responses and call to action.
Thank you, Cole. Hi, everyone. I'm Rich Voss. Happy to talk about some of the surveys that are currently open for tribal communities to complete. We wanted to understand some of the barriers that residents face across California in terms of broadband access, affordability, and adoption. And we created 2 different surveys to be able to do this. One is an organizational survey called the Digital Equity Ecosystem Mapping Tool. We began with this tool in May, and actually probably in April, and we issued it to all stakeholders that we've been in contact with across California. This includes state agencies, CBOs, faith-based organizations. We created a specific link, as you can see here on the bit.ly link below, we created a specific link for tribes because we really are very interested in understanding some of the great programs and services currently being offered in tribal communities, and we want to understand what the resource gaps may be. This tool helps us to see all the programs and services that are currently being offered and where there might be some gaps in these program and service offerings according to region or according to county or according to tribe. So please help us by promoting this tool to all of the organizations that you may know of. We would encourage tribal governments to complete this, tribally focused organizations to complete this, but please, tribal health facilities as well. Scan the QR code, take down the link, help put this out there and get us some information. I would like to say that Mr. Bethencourt, you're a wonderful example of a portion of this tool that accommodates questions like yours. We actually have a section in the Dean tool that entities can answer and say, I'm not currently in the digital equity space, but I'd like to be. And so what you brought up just now is a prime example of how a tribal health facility may not consider itself to be in the digital equity space, but is definitely in a prime position to be able to do this, a promotion of broadband access and affordable programs to patients that come to the health facilities. So definitely complete the tool if you haven't. We'd really be interested to learn more. Next slide. The other survey that we issued is the online public survey. This targets residents. It's specific to California households. We wanted to understand the barriers to access, affordability, and adoption faced by all California households. And we've created a specific one for tribes to complete. But we want to begin with the general survey that we issued. We expected a target of about 10,000 responses, and we were overjoyed when we received over 40,000 responses. As you can see, San Diego actually put us at the top with over 12,000 responses just for San Diego County alone. So many thanks to everyone who participated in this survey. We actually had quite a few entities that helped us push this out through very effective text campaigns that include SANDAG in San Diego and AARP that targeted our aging population in the state of California and through its membership programs to get the survey out. Next slide. So as you can see, the largest share of responses came from people age 60 and over, thanks to AARP's very effective campaign of pushing this out. And we also received a large share from ethnic or minority communities. You will see closer to the bottom that we did receive responses from over 500 residents from tribal communities, but we need to know more. We know that there are unique barriers faced by tribes, and we need to understand what those barriers are, what those issues are, and we need to hear from you. So please push out the survey. We're going to give you the link in the following slide, but we really need you to push this out because this data allows us to really do a deep dive at a very granular level to understand what barriers are being faced at the household level by communities across the state. We were also thrilled to see that we had a lot of participation from individuals with disabilities and individuals with limited literacy and language barriers. We offered the survey in 14 languages, and every single language was accessed via the survey. So we were thrilled to be able to make this a fully accessible, audio-enabled survey that as many residents could access as possible. Next slide. The digital equity public surveys online right now, specifically for tribes. We've left the link open for tribal communities to complete. There is a paper survey, but it's very limited in the number of questions it asks. So we highly encourage you to use your mobile phone to access this survey and send it out to as many tribal residents as you can to get the word out. We really do need to hear from tribal residents about what issues they're facing, what barriers they're facing, so that we can incorporate this in a comprehensive state digital equity plan. If you have any need for us to be able to walk through the survey or the DEEM tool with any member of your tribe, give us a call, reach out to us at digitalequity@state.ca.gov. We'd be more than happy to help. If there are any questions, we'll be available to answer. Thank you.
So stepping in for Deputy Director Scott Adams, our final next steps for digital equity and kind of a apologies, I thought I was unmuted. Stepping in for Deputy Director Scott Adams here. Some of the next steps we'd love for you to look out for is that in late summer, early fall this year, we will have the state digital equity plan out. And so please be on the lookout for a public comment period. We're open for 30 days for you to tell us if we got it right. Give us your feedback and make sure we're representing the tribal communities in the appropriate way. Finally, we'll have an October 25th statewide planning group meeting with our 20 plus agencies. Our final state digital equity plan that will go to the feds is scheduled for the last quarter. So probably in that December timeframe of 2023. We have AB 2750 that's related directly to digital equity planning that we are deadline by January 1st. And then finally, we're looking out into 2024 by that first quarter to really have a good understanding and ability to start heading toward capacity grants and funding a lot of the ideas, the work, the strategies that are outlined in the state digital equity plan. Next slide. Here is our contact. Again, I think there's been lots of great questions. Please feel free if we didn't get to your question or there's some follow-up ideas or barriers that you'd like to talk about, please send an email to the team. And finally, just want to thank you for attending the June Outcome Area Working Group meeting for the tribal collaboration. To stay involved with the process, please visit the Broadband for All portal. And finally, thank you for your continued engagement and participation in the state's digital equity planning efforts. Thank you again. Have a great Friday and weekend, rest of your day. And Anna, if you could please stop the recording and end the meeting.